as a pack. They have such an extraordinary degree of intuition that their understanding of one another's intentions often seems beyond normal explanation.
Come to Bright Town, this is my town.
Living my life, living my life. Living my life, living my life. You wouldn't last. Living my life, living my life. Living my life, living my life. You wouldn't last.
Till the blow, legs MC, that heart of gold, carved in stone. Running your gums, you better park it slow. Just some things that I can't condone. Been in the game for 8 years, making rap tunes. Ever since you were flapping in chat rooms. Living back on Queensway, man's are trapped in cliché. Kick back, rely on the DJ. Unemployed, getting fucked on a weekday. Been there, got the t-shirt on eBay. Got that shit out the way in my teenage. One day I'll be a brilliant man. Tech microphone like Millie and Dan. Crystal clear like a digital scan, then disappear like a visible man.
One day, when the world's in our palms and we can escape to another place, get high on a life of rhyme, living in a state of mind of a deep faith. Cause we are the chosen fam, and any head who don't like, we don't give a damn. Just living our days in a dreamland, and we're never gonna stray from the main plan.
Living my life, living my life. Living my life, living my life. You wouldn't last. Living my life, living my life. Living my life, living my life. You wouldn't last.
Mr. White with the conscious words, I follow my heart, not follow the herd. Speak slow, slurring my verbs, living on coffee and potent herbs. You can't fuck, cause this is the proof. Legs are white like a bomb in your roof. Don't look now, I'll spit on your mask. Step on your groove, blast them apart. Look at me now, read my fist. Born in this sticks, I ain't ripping no shit. One of these days I'll make myself rich and get a grip on this nervous itch. Cause I'm getting bored of spitting to a brick wall. Ready for the fat shows and the grand halls. Waiting in vain for the applause. Out in the way by the seashore.
We stand tall among these posers. When the smoke clears and the show is over, I get cold like Nova Scotia. Ain't taking shit from no promoter. Bag of chips all over my shoulders. Trigger the bombs, now flows exploding. I'll be rapping till my throat is closing. You drop your guard, now your nose is broken.
Living my life, living my life. Living my life, living my life. You wouldn't last. Living my life, living my life. Living my life, living my life. You wouldn't last.
Just exploring a few of the claims. The mainstream media narrative is that it naturally came from nowhere, as it's racist to suggest it came from China. The UN and China did a great job for humanity. The right-wing narrative, or you could say QAnon claim, is the Chinese, the deep state or communism created it in a lab to destroy America and take over the world. But it's distinct polybasic furin backbone rules out purposely creating a bioweapon from scratch, so there's no way that it was created in a lab. A number of ways you can prove this. Exosomes, which was Andrew Kaufman's claim. No viruses have ever been isolated. They don't meet Koch's postulates and are exosomes. Koch's postulates, he abandoned the first and the third part, and they were invented 8 years before viruses were even discovered. So for people to still be trying to throw Koch's postulates, something that was created 150 years ago and was used for maybe 30 years, it's one of the biggest schoolboy errors, and it's quite funny. Next claim was the Kawasaki claim by Shield Destroyer. He went from it's 5G to Kawasaki to it doesn't exist within a year. Next claim is empty hospitals, which was, I think, an internet creation. The hospital wards were empty all over the world. Most of the people dying were in care homes or at home. Plus, it's not a third world country where people are treated in the hallways. COVID-19 wards are sectioned off from the rest of the hospital and have security. People running around hospitals filming empty hallways created this narrative. I think Debbie Hicks was one of the main people behind this. CDC didn't have an isolated virus, so the virus is not real. Well, this is a totally misunderstood and cherry-picked claim by, I couldn't tell you who, but basically they're using a test that the CDC did as early as March and claiming that this was the main test around the PCR test. That particular document is describing what was used to determine the lowest amount of viral genetic material that the RT-PCR assay could detect, and the limit of detection of the RT-PCR assay was determined. The CDC have used transcribed RNA as the positive control, which means they use synthetically produced genetic material to that carried by the virus, meaning they are using something that has been synthesized and isolated already to determine the limit that the PCR test could detect. So again, totally cherry-picked and misrepresented in so many ways. The next claim is by Peter Bjorger, Mike Yeadon, and mainly Andrew Kaufman. PCR tests are designed to detect exosomes, chromosome 8, or that the amount of cycles stipulated by the WHO means that the virus isn't real. Again, this is another misrepresentation. Using the amount of cycles has nothing to do with detecting the virus, and the more cycles actually you do, the less chance of you seeing the virus because of the fluorescence, which I haven't heard any people mentioning or talking about in their claims when they do mention it, or their understanding of it. The next claim is the 5G claim, which would have come from either Thomas Cowan or Mark Steele, and what they were saying is 5G was first switched on in China, it poisons the air and people breathe, causing them to die, not COVID-19. Again, like the empty hospitals claim, 80% of the people were dying in care homes which don't have 5G, and many people are dying in rural areas, which a lot of these rural areas don't have electricity, let alone even 3G. So to claim that all these people are dying from 5G is another pseudo misunderstanding by Mark Steele and Thomas Cowan. And then the next claim was the old man collapsing in the street in China. Why are people not dropping dead all around us? Well, number one, there was never a timestamp on this video of the man collapsing. Number two, we don't even know if it was in China during the time of when it was meant to be filmed. Also, to say that video from the mainstream media is proof that the mainstream media's virus doesn't exist it's another schoolboy error. What about his autopsy claim? Can you trust the mainstream media? Or what about China's source? People are just sharing this around as if it's some legitimate proof as to it existing. So there's many claims going around, and as per usual, virus denialists and the people making these claims don't have any test or way that someone like myself or a professional scientist could come along and test this to see if it does prove to be real or not real or legitimate in any way. To just throw words around based on a YouTube video that you've watched or a few YouTube videos that you watch is baseless claim. The next claim was people are dying with, not from COVID-19. Whilst this is true in some cases and death numbers can be and have been manipulated, people are cherry picking data and presenting it in their own way. A few things have been floating around the internet for the last year and a half, and I find it quite easy to pick out and see where they are getting this information from now, the original sources and how they've changed along the lines and who is spreading it around. It's the same sort of people at the top, and then there's the sort of second level of people below them, and then it's passed on between family members, friends and groups on WhatsApp, Facebook, Twitter, whichever group you're in. Echo chamber for or against the government or the pandemic or plandemic, whatever you call it, and it's quite easy to see. So I just wanted to explore a few things to do with the tests that have been going around and what people have been saying over the last year. First claim that is coming up all around the internet is that the inventor, KM, said that the tests cannot detect for V's at all. A lot of this is false information and has been misrepresented in many ways. He and the 7 other inventors patented the tests on the basis it detects V's, and thus won the Nobel Prize for it in chemistry in 1993 with La Jolla in California, USA. Then went on with his company to perfect this PCR test even more than what it has been used. So this is a false claim that's been spreading around years and years, and it was first attributed by John Lauriston in his book in 1996 about AIDS, and it's been attributed to COVID-19 pandemic and somehow misconstrued and made up. And this is kind of what happens with science. It's reused by people down the line a few years later. So this claim that he said that it doesn't detect viruses at all, I haven't found it anywhere apart from that book written in 1996 that I've just clearly showed you. You can go and have a look at any of these claims, and if you know where the inventor Gary Mullis said this, then please send it to me. And also, he died before COVID-19 existed, so anything that he says about it is false. The second claim is that 30 to 40 cycles set allows the MSN or the government to scare people with the case numbers. Firstly, a measurement is taken after every cycle, and the virus will be found at around 5, 6, 7 times within those 40 cycles. You can find it at, say, the 3rd cycle, the 20th cycle, the 29th cycle, the 35th cycle, whatever. These are just examples, and the analysts will know which cycles and where the virus was detected at. Plus, the fluorescence becomes proportional to the synthesized DNA. You need a certain amount of fluorescence to see the virus, and the more cycles that it goes through, the less chance you will have seeing the virus at all. So to claim that they're doing more cycles to find the virus is a complete misunderstanding and incredibly false. And everybody uses this when they're shouting at people or they're trying to get their point across that the PCR tests are wrong, when this is a total misunderstanding, and they just look silly when going on about this 30 to 40 cycles or however many it's set, because like I just said, they take a measurement after every single cycle. Even if they find it at the 3rd or the 4th cycle, they'll continue the other 30 or 40 cycles, and then all of the findings, they'll take one big reading so they can see a better picture of the genome and how much virus is in a person at that time. It helps with the measurements in the end. So the third claim that's coming up, it only detects small parts of the virus. The PCR test looks for a specific portion of the SARS-CoV-2 virus and doesn't need to detect the whole genome. Claim that it only detects small parts of the virus or something that's in all of us is another misunderstanding that people just don't get. You don't need to detect a whole genome or a whole virus because it would just take longer. It's just a waste of time and money. They're trying to make things quick so that they can detect where the virus is in society, and the PCR test is very specific in doing that, and it just gets a very small portion that you can only find in SARS-CoV-2 and in none other virus. The fourth claim is the high false positives. The false positive rate has not exceeded 0.3%, but a claim going around and on every misunderstood post, video or notice claims it's 93, 96 or whatever the rate they are claiming, and cherry pick their data from. By calculating ratios between these values, we can quantitatively measure the accuracy of the test. That's how false positive rate is calculated. Instead of dividing the number of false positives by the number of negatives plus false positives, which is the formula. Someone misrepresented the data and divided the number of false positives by positives. So dividing any positive by itself, even if it's just one false positive out of a million, you will always get 100% false positive. This is where the slime people of misinformation have been cashing in on YouTube views and private seminars where they're charging people to listen to this information, and the people defending these false claims are being led down the garden path with hopeless information that won't get them anywhere, but will just lead them into echo chambers and false information circles. Is this from the controlled opposition, or is it just snake oil agents? That is the question that needs to be answered. But to say that there's high false positives is far from true. Like I said, it's not exceeded 0.3%. I think in the entire history of the PCR test, it's never exceeded 10%. So to say it's exceeding 93, 96 or 97% or whatever is completely misunderstood and false. The fifth claim, taking the test. Many claims have been made about taking them. People even get attacked online if they admit to taking them, even though some people have no choice due to the situation they are living in. One woman approached me with lots of information about how evil they are. She then admitted to having a pregnancy test during a few of her pregnancies in the past. Another man, during a rant on a live stream, told me that people who take them are sellouts. I then found his proud video of his family DNA results from 5 years before. These are just two examples of many people out there who have been led down the garden path, pointless information that will only subconsciously create a barrier for some who will refuse to participate in society on the basis of false information about the tests being spread round and being embedded into people's preconceived views that goes in opposition to the government. Anything that goes in opposition to the government, they will just accept. That was created by the grifters and all government controlled opposition programs set up in advance to manage the anger of the population for the coming pandemic, because they knew it was coming, so they had to do this. So the PCR test has been used for many different things over many years. The applications of the techniques include DNA cloning for sequencing, gene cloning and manipulation, gene mutagenesis, construction of DNA-based phylogenes or functional analysis of genes, diagnostic and monitoring of genetic disorders, amplification of ancient DNA. You've also got DNA profiling for forensic science and DNA family parentage testing, detection of pathogens in nucleic acid tests for the diagnostic of infectious diseases. So it has a few different roles and different uses in ways you can do it, and each country has different protocols, so it's got different standards as well. It's not just one set thing that has been invented for this one thing. Is it real? Does it exist? Some people, without truly understanding, say it doesn't. To all those who claim SARS-CoV-2 or any virus does not exist, the virus sphere consists of 4 realms, 9 kingdoms, 16 phyla, 2 subphyla, 36 classes, 55 orders, 8 suborders, 168 families, 103 subfamilies, 1,421 genera, 168 subgenera, 6,519 species. They've all been verified in a number of ways, and we've seen them growing in cultures. They've also been replicated many times by many people, even amateurs. This is the first transmission electron micrograph of the SARS-CoV-2 virus particles isolated from a patient in Russia in January of 2020. Here's the coronavirus successfully growing in a lab. Many people have done this as well. It was decoded in January 2020, just weeks after the world started to learn of the coronavirus. Each of those individual letters is a genetic building block known as a nucleotide, and when built up they form an organism's genetic code, which we can use to understand them. Each organism has a different code and varying amount of nucleotides. A human has about 3 billion, whereas a virus such as SARS-CoV-2 has about 30,000. Thermo Fisher Scientific, it's one of the hundreds of websites that sell different parts of the SARS-CoV-2 that's been isolated and you can buy different parts of the proteins. There's another website, BEI Resources, which sells every single virus, fungi, bacteria, everything that has been isolated, viral cultured, recombinated, and many different processes it's had to it. You then have another website with the whole purified viral lysate of the SARS-CoV-2 for 320 to over £1,000, isolated from a patient straight up from China. We've also got the human ACE2 is for sale, 230 odd pounds to £800. Isolations around the world. I stopped saving them after about 10 of them because there's so many you can find. There's also studies and scientific experiments on these links of the size of each individual parts of the genome of the SARS-CoV-2. We've got the number of proteins, the length, the evolution rate, the mutation rate, replication timescales, entry into cells, eclipse period, host cells, and it's all backed up with scientific reports and experiments from years ago or this year.
The point is, before I even talk about it, by the way, so that means they don't even care about the information. If anyone anywhere is saying Wuhan didn't start the war, then you're just a shill. That's called a lack of intelligence, right? You're choosing to believe in something because you want to, not because it's actually verified, right? That's what children do. Now, in this case, we're staring at evidence. Doesn't mean we know it started in Wuhan, doesn't mean we know it started in the United States or anywhere else. It means that at the end of the day, we see evidence showing that there are clear financial ties back to the US government, to the very people who started the narrative. That has to be considered. And if you think that's being a shill, well, then you go back to your echo chambers, because you're never going to find any truth if you're not willing to consider things that you don't want to look at. I mean, we all have people that we believe in. We all have people that we want to trust. At the end of the day, you still have to be open to things that may paint them in a bad color. If you're not, well, then you're never going to be open to truth.
SARS-CoV-2 is an enveloped virus which has one of the largest genomes at 30 kb. It has a illicit lifestyle in 3 stages. Firstly, with the attachment and entry, replication and synthesis, and viral assembly and release. What happens is the spiked proteins attach to the ACE2 receptor through endoptosis. The furin of the TMPRSS2 is cleaved, and then the fusion of the virus of the host cells happen. The ACE2 is situated many parts of the human body, and once the virus is into the cell, the RNA is released. The viral genome is the positive strand RNA. The RNA is subdivided into 2 parts, the ORF1A and the ORF1B, primary translation being the first, and the structural proteins, subgenomic RNAs, being the latter. The S stands for spike proteins, the E is envelope, the M is membrane, and the N is nucleoplastic. The first section of PP1As make one long protein in strands of 10, but they need to be cut up before they can do their job. The cutting up happens with the 2 important proteinase. The PL proteinase are the ones shown in purple, and the 3CL protease in blue. So once the section is translated, the PL and the 3CL cut themselves off and start cutting off the proteins within the section. Once the RDRP is made, then they can start creating the RNAs that is needed for making the new proteins. Another classic that's going around this year is Koch's postulates. 2 of the most frequent claims made by virus denialists have been that the PCR test doesn't test for a virus, but the human genetic material. That was David Icke. And the classic Koch's postulates have not been met for the virus. That was Kaufman. As for Chromosome 8, on the 24th of August 2020 on Kaufman's YouTube channel, he claimed the PCR test used widely for testing COVID-19 actually tested for a sequence that can be found in the human chromosome 8. I came to the conclusion once I learnt about it that it was all complete nonsense. Also, neither Ike nor Kaufman believe in the existence of SARS-CoV-2 virus, nor in the reliability of the tests or the reality of any pandemic caused by the virus. They have enthusiastically jumped on the chromosome 8 claim. Chromosome 8 is one of the 23 pairs of chromosomes in humans. People normally have 2 copies of this chromosome. It spans about 140 million base pairs, the building material of DNA, and represents about 4.5 and 5% of the total DNA in cells. About 8% of the genes are involved in brain development and function, and about 16% involved in the production of cancer. A region of about 15 megabases that appear to have a high mutation rate. This region shows a significant divergence between humans and chimpanzees, suggesting that its high mutation rates have contributed to the evolution of the human brain. But Ike and Kaufman argued a while back that the PCR test might detect exomes instead of viruses, or that viruses and exomes are actually the same thing. But now they give another twist to the continuous story of virus denialism, the effect that both probe and primers have to work together to get a test result, and simply pointing to a similarity of one of the primers and a piece of the DNA, it just doesn't make any sense. It's kind of proving that he doesn't even understand it himself, and that they're both promoting stuff that they don't even understand themselves. Search the nucleotides of the HCOV 2019 human coronavirus for the forward string and you will not find it. Then research the reverse that I posted here and you will find it every time. So the fact that CT, CCC, TTT, GTT, GT, GTT, GT somehow matches a tiny part of the human genome, it does not matter. It is not the sequence the test looks for in the first place. The sequence the test looks for is whatever exists between the forward and the reverse primers. These sequences are very close together in the SARS-CoV-2 genome. David Icke and Andrew Kaufman lack even the most basic understanding of the PCR test and the whole genome sequencing in general. They are just selectively misreading whatever they think they understand from science to find confirmation of their own sort of narratives that they want to push forward, when in fact it's just nonsense. Kaufman also claims that viruses actually didn't exist. There is no evidence for a virus. Scientists had mistaken very small cell particles called exomes to be viruses, but exomes, far from being harmful to our health, are in fact helpful because they help us to get rid of toxins. He said if it existed at all, was a variety of ailments mostly caused by environmental factors or stress. Some viruses may look like exomes under the microscope in some phases of their life cycle, but that doesn't apply to all viruses. Everywhere, viruses differ widely in their visual appearance, and more importantly, relying solely on a microscope is old school virology, since genomics and bioinformatics have now taken over. Everything under the sun, from animals to plants to fungi to viruses to bacteria, even the most primitive archaea, has been sequenced these days and aligned with the larger tree of life. The virus has never been isolated. As a consequence, the genome sequences of this particular coronavirus, which are now available, the majority of all this nonsense science, such as germ theory denialism, usually involves arguing Louis Pasteur's model of infectious disease, which was wrong, people say, and that Antoine Béchamp was right. In fact, its origins are rooted in Béchamp's empirically disproved in the context of disease theory of pleomorphism. Another obsolete variation is known as terrain theory and postulates that diseases' tissues attract germs rather than being caused by it, which stemmed from many other people later on in the 2000s, such as Stefan Lanka. The core argument of Lanka's seems always to be that viruses had never been isolated, and the electron microscope photos are in reality photos of normal cell particles.
Yes, great. Hi, thanks for having me. What I want to, thanks for the lecture. I really appreciate it. And as a return, I actually teach a course in genomic sequencing in the fall that I welcome you both to take, so we can clear up some of the issues that you might have had. in terms of that black box, which is not a black box to people who know bioinformatics and sequencing. Just wanted to share with you this image here, which you can see is the supposed, SARS-CoV-2 viruses and the Koch proteins. These are two independent lines of evidence because they ran a Western gel which detects the protein, as you can see, correct? So this Koch protein here, these are actually predicted in the genome itself. So how does that work with your model if we have basically three independent lines of evidence that the genomic sequencing is predicting the spike protein produces a specific type of amino acid sequence that we can visualize with this cryo-EM and also detect on a Western blot, which detects the protein sequence?
I think we would need to see the methods
Sure,
for
absolutely.
evaluating this, which we wouldn't have time to do now, but perhaps we can follow up on.
Yeah, great. Here's the methods. I definitely recommend you look at it. They actually use the sucrose gradient, which you said was missing in extraction of SARS-CoV-2 in this paper. So they ran a sucrose gradient and extracted the virus, and then had several rounds of the plate assays, which shows the CP damage.
Are you saying they extracted the virus directly from a person?
They extracted the virus, they purified the virus using a sucrose gradient.
With no cell culture?
They have used the cell culture, but why does that matter? Cell cultures, again, cell cultures, if you pass through multiple rounds of cell culture, the virus can reproduce. So if you take the extraction of that cell culture and replate it on another plate, the virus then enters the cells, reproduces again and again and again. If by what you say is true that there's a toxin involved in this, then the toxin will be diluted as you go down with your cell plating cultures, right? So you go through round 1, 2, 3, 4, the toxin will dilute itself, whereas the replicating virus will keep replicating as you add in from the next cell culture. And then, as you can say, another line of evidence is that you extract it with the sucrose gradient, which is what they have done, aligned it with the genomic sequencing, which we can clear up some of the black boxes that you have issues with. And as you can see, the visual evidence matches, right, what is predicted in the genomic sequence.
Okay, let's get some answers, okay?
Go ahead. Thank you.
Yeah, I don't think Tom and I can really evaluate this, but I think the most important question has been answered, that the sample didn't come directly from a clinical sample where the virus was purified out of that.
But it did originally. It did originally come from.
Let's just get the answer and then we can let you respond, okay?
Well, like I said, we really would need to review the methods section in order to know what we're talking about, and we'd be happy to do that and get a response, or at least I would, if you can send me the actual paper.
The paper has been uploaded multiple times now in the comments, and we can email that to you.
As for Stefan Lanka, in a court case, he was ordered to pay €100,000 to David Bardens, who proved the existence of measles in 6 different ways. Lanka then appealed, changing the goalpost that it didn't meet his criteria. The court case ordered that the measles had been proven to exist, but it didn't meet Lanka's criteria, and Lanka didn't have to pay the £100,000. He then proceeded to go around the internet and spread information which was embellished, regurgitated, misunderstood, and spread out for the last 5 to 10 years that no virus has ever been isolated. Ike claims, among many other things, that there is a connection between the COVID-19 COVID-19 symptoms and 5G, the fast internet platform soon to be rolled out in many countries and already operative in some others, including China. He states with 5G, life as we know it will be over. COVID-19 doesn't exist and the real disease is caused by so-called exomes, particles expelled from cells due to radiation damage. But as I have stated from January, February and in many videos that the 5G propaganda was to be avoided, and yet another subject people haven't fully researched and just took on all this nonsense as gospel truth as they usually do. It was revealed by a number of people in late August that someone had tracked all the original 5G causes COVID conspiracy theories from a Twitter address tracked to an address in Brussels where the EU's horizon is situated, all between March the 27th and April the 4th, with over 10,000 tweets, all from one channel and then rolled out by paid agents like Mark Steele.
People seem to think that microwaves, they associate with the microwave oven in the same way they associate radiation with nuclear radiation. They associate the word microwave with the microwave oven. The only thing that's connected there is the microwave oven uses 2.4 gigahertz. Let's put that as 2.4 gigahertz. It's round about there in the spectrum. And there's another device in your home that also uses 2.4 gigahertz. It's your Wi-Fi router. Oh, it's also looking round for a phone. It's also your phone that communicates the Wi-Fi router at 2.4 gigahertz and 5 gigahertz, and it's also your laptop that communicates at 2.4 gigahertz and 5 gigahertz with the router. Router in Britain, router in America. So it's worth mentioning 2.4 gigahertz, 5 gigahertz. 2.4 gigahertz is exactly the same frequency as your microwave operates at. One of those devices is designed for cooking roast potatoes, and the other is designed for communicating with your computer and transmits much lower power. One transmits thousands of watts, one transmits milliwatts. Keep in mind, this is visible light in here, and it's getting longer and longer and more harmless, more and more harmless. Oh, there's the mobile phones. So it's not even remotely. Then we're going down here to, well, for those of you who like such things, the low frequency resonant earth waves, which aren't exactly going to kill you because they're around us all the time. So I regard the electromagnetic spectrum below the visible section, I regard that all as completely safe.
There are many forms of misinformation that's weaponized and turned into fake news, satire, propaganda, misleading or out of context information, conspiracy theory and clickbait. Conspiracy theory is when information is packaged as legitimate and people believe it and they hold it dear to their heart, not knowing that it's mainly false. Clickbait is obviously when you click on something and there's a news story that looks real and you then spread it around. You've also got satire where it's just joking and taking the piss, and then there's propaganda which is purposely put out there by the government or corporations or individuals, and this all contrives as the fake news circle that people just keep regurgitating, spreading around without actually doing any research. Question 1. Where did the SARS-CoV-2 come from? Pretty obvious. It wasn't created in a lab and purposely spread. It's pretty obvious and has been debunked by a number of people that it doesn't exist, or it's 5G or Chromosome 8 or false testing. It's none of those. But I'll only leave 2 questions: naturally derived and naturally spread, or naturally derived and then later modified in a lab. I personally believe it was naturally derived, naturally spread, and they've built up a vaccine and pharmaceutical industry around this entire study for the last 25 to 30 years. They've had a number of companies, Chinese, Canadian, British, American, all studying and funding and paying for virology research in countries such as China. They've been, really studying hard the effects of what these things can do to humans and how they could manipulate the situation and, like I just said, create a massive corporate machine all around the study of this small thing. So this is kind of my chain of how it happened from start to finish. It was naturally derived from a distinct cave outside of Wuhan, China, around about 2013, and possibly even longer. People like DARPA, Michael Callahan, Shi Zhengli, they were all studying bats within caves and villages around these caves for 20, maybe 25 years. Plenty of evidence to suggest, and there's plenty of scientific reports from these throughout the years of their progress, of what they've been doing. Poor lifestyle practices slows the process of converting angiotensin 1 to angiotensin 2 in the blood, which makes it a perfect host for the spiked proteins of the SARS-CoV-2 sequence to enter. They figured this out around about 15-20 years ago as well. So this was another part of the big study. Gates Foundation has put 13.5 billion to a number of companies, organisations and media outlets to build this massive web of sort of vaccine pharmaceutical companies that are going to save the world at a huge cost. And as you've seen with the lockdowns and the trillions in bank loans, they've made a massive amount of money. And then the drug companies over the next sort of 20 years will make billions from many different type of diseases and curing these diseases. They created the Event 201, predicting everything that sort of came true. This happened in October of 2019, which was sponsored by the foundation again, the Gates Foundation. The official outbreak happened in China in January 2020. The WHO waited until March to declare a world pandemic. Zhong Nashan took over the sort of Chinese health authorities again, like he did under the SARS outbreak. Dr. Ferguson of the Imperial College London epidemiology models predicted 4% deaths in the UK when it was lower than 0.04%. The WHO then endorsed these models on a global pandemic, and all the countries, apart from a number, say I think it was about 4 or 5 countries, didn't follow what the WHO said, which was led by Dr. Tedros Adhanom, who had been accused many years ago of genocide within his own country, Ethiopia, and causing vicious outbreaks there as well with cholera. There's lots of evidence to back this up as well. Moving on, they're using Nobel Prize winner Kary Mullis's RNA PCR test, which amplify and find certain proteins linked to the SARS-CoV-2. The thing that I'm putting across is almost everyone on the planet has had this SARS-CoV-2 now, if not more than once. So the PCR tests are finding it in almost all of us because we've all had it, and the chances are that at least 80 to 90% of us don't even know we've had it because it's not that bad. The government have been hyping it up and pushing society towards vaccines, which leads to the last point. Billions in revenue for the campaign for vaccines, drugs, pharmaceutical research and contracts. This is happening right now. So the stage is set in the UK and the USA, or the developed countries. We have about 1 million out of 65 million people that oppose the tyranny that the government have set forth, and these 1 million people, probably 10 million in the USA, are entrapped by their government at the top, it's passed down to Whitehall, Tavistock, the police, the intelligence services, the alternative media. This is what I would like to call the outer ring of power. And then you have people in the middle such as Kate Shimarani, Mark Steele, allegedly known as Dave, David Icke, Andrew Kaufman, Amanda Vollmer, Maxi Gann, Del Bigtree. You've even got QAnon, Mike Yeadon, Stefan Lanka, Patrick Salvani, Thomas Cowan, and all of these people since I'd say around April, in their own specific and certain ways, have been spreading false news about the coronavirus, and have all been debunked by a number of people. And I could easily debunk most of their information and intelligence and the stuff that they've been passing around quite easily. It's all schoolboy era stuff, and this is what set the narrative for this sort of 1 million people that want to oppose the government, and it set a lot of echo chambers, and people had a lot of ideas. And what this did, it compartmentalizes, breaks down, and no one really knows a way of opposing the government. And these kind of make up Save Our Rights, Stand Up X, these sort of groups to oppose the government.
I'm sorry, you've forgotten what it is to be a kid. I can see that it's a realist proper. Goes out there Beatrix Potter so they can be a bit of the wide wonderful world of breadwinners, 10-minute dinners, hedge trimmers, and other such self-evident truths. Like if you're SGT9, T-right, old crumblies mumbling about the end of innocence. But here's a secret something that everybody's a suckling who is just adjusting. So if you rap without love or some amount of imagination, your shit is plastic. I'm so nasty plastic. If you'd actually ask me, I'd have taken full responsibility. Make you think you're on a pillar 3 with some military infrasonic subwoofer that can push a field of cows over. How sobering the thought is, my collective form like orchids using the forest resources. Watch the metamorphosis that gets dealt on the poor unfortunate to hang about for more of this and this. The universe is a fresh place. Boy, these humans are well strange. I know girls have helped me cell train with their gorgeousness, or just cause I'm dumb like that. Plus when some sunlight catches a curse that makes poetry, I know it's cheese, but fuck it, I hug in public, so must be a bit suspect. And if I said I bled from my butt cleft, we get more depth of subject than herds of battle nerds claiming to do this and that to you, but come in with nothing spectacular and can receive a little tap from my mother's wooden spatula. It's a natural reaction to keep our eyes hidden, but what happens when our defense mechanism becomes a prison? Times like this one we can remember the good things, like eating Yorkshire puddings and wooding teams of air hostesses. Shake up the sign and see what's left standing free. Focus with the band and we've a plan to surround the monarchy. Baby, I'm married to the ocean. A great mistake is to anticipate the outcome. The universe is a fresh place. And then when it's the sound of silence, a sweet nothing, because I don't need a running commentary on product or some ego update. The world's a fresh place, mate. Why try and wear a mask so unconvincingly when we could be sincere? People are reality engineers, adaptable. You can dislocate your shoulders and scramble up the manacles. Human empathy carries candles to the stickiest darkness, and when we connect, the silent whisper becomes a part of us, man, making our eyes shine. Yeah, I'll show you mine if you show me yours. There. Now look at me, looking at you. I think we're strong enough to let the world see, to not be bothered with gossipers. Because some people watch the people watchers, observe what occurs. Are you strong enough to accept another person's weakness? I mean, which peasant knows all the next one's collection of secrets that are perfecting psychology's meet people? Ooh, I go from person to person, turning corners and swerving through more herds of humans. See if I can be fluent in communion with the movement of the microcosm, rotting and blossoming. I take a lung of oxygen cause I'm reminded of the short and sweetness. And just so that you knew who it is, the new fluid intuitives. I blew a kiss at two little kittens sitting while I scribble this in my scrapbook. I want to learn to relax the way that cats look.
And sing it all day long.
song that never ends.
Looking into the government opposition, especially the film crews, the agency actors and people around, and the big name independent opposition such as Piers Corbyn, David Icke, Nigel Farage, these are all people that are supposedly meant to be representing us in opposition to the government. They seem to all be getting arrested all the time, and the newspapers to fall straight into the anti-vaxxers, the violent anti-lockdown, and a number of other weaponized words and polarized words that will be put into the media and has been portrayed into people for the last few months. So they've all got this picture of people who do research and looking into information and evidence that they're all just anti-vaxxers. They all just want to cause trouble on the streets of London. A lot of us are all just here doing decent research and putting good information out, and it's getting censored by the same people. So we're just looking into a number of the people. I'm not saying they're all paid by the government, but they seem to all be playing a role, whether knowingly or unknowingly, and they all seem to give a bad name for the truth movement and the opposition to the government, for which the media can then do, like we've seen in a number of videos. And we've seen a number of people exposing people like Kate Shemirani, Mark Steele. There's a number of people who are all involved and meant to be representing us. And the same people have appeared in the past in groups such as the Flat Earth group. The last year has been a test for all, gains for some, losses for others, but as we approach the end of what started on the 31st of December 2019, and more of us have a greater understanding, more information, the evidence has been brought forth, the grifters, crony politicians, corrupt corporations and many other negative happenings have come to a head. Some of us are left waiting, hoping, or working towards finding some real transparent information and answers to the questions many of us have been seeking. Today I'm going to be talking about the SAGE members, Imperial College and other politicians who have conflicts of interest, purposely waited 2 months and act in the most profitable way for everyone involved in such a crony manner, and how they are coercing people into propaganda and limited information. It was the Taiwanese who alerted the WHO on December 31st, 2019 of an unknown pathogen spreading amongst some of their patients. Within 3 days, the Taiwanese then began to lock down their country, impose an international flight ban to anyone not from Taiwan, closed all non-food shops, told people to stay at home for 3 months. The border control was merged with the health department. A live public national emergency was declared a whole day on TV, and the 20 million population was informed as to what it possibly could be, how best to protect themselves and stay healthy. Within the first year, they only had 22 deaths. As of June 22nd, 2021, they now have 478 total deaths from their actions taken earlier. Welcome to the government's department named the SAGE Group of members of the government, Imperial College, Oxford Uni, King's College, Wellcome Trust and the LSHTM, who meet daily with the government's COBRA task force, which implement all policies set under the Pandemic and Coronavirus Act. They meet with ministerial implementation groups who liaise with the Cabinet, COBRA and down the lines to the intelligence services, the devolved governments, police and councils, based on scientific advice of the SAGE Group and led by Dr. Ferguson of the Imperial College's predictions models, which he then gave to the UN. The 20 members consist of 2 from the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, 2 from the King's College, 2 from the University of Oxford, 2 from the Wellcome Trust, 2 from the Imperial College and 10 from the government, and then there's a few cross parties. In many cases, the UK's government's lack of financial transparency in inhabiting COVID-19 has resulted in negative headlines. In April, the government announced that it was placing Valence in charge of a new vaccine task force to expedite research to produce a coronavirus in the East. Among the named members were the AstraZeneca, the Wellcome Trust and the John Bell of Oxford University. By July, the UK government had signed a coronavirus in the East deal for an undisclosed sum with GlaxoSmithKline, securing 60 million doses of an untested treatment that was still being developed. In September, media outlets reported that Valence had 600,000 worth of shares in the company. The government responded to say that while the heads of government vaccine task force Valence has no input in the contractual and commercial intentions on the vaccine procurement, which are taken by ministers following a robust cross-government approvals regime. Days later, the Daily Mail broke another story, this time focused on Bell. On top of his role with the vaccine task force, Bell also headed the National COVID Testing Scientific Advisory Panel and chaired the government's new test approvals group. But the Mail discovered something that the BMJ had reported in 2020, that Bell had substantial financial interests, now amounting to 773,000 worth of shares in pharma company Roche, which had sold the government £13.5 million worth of antibody tests in May. Following the deal, Bell appeared on Channel 4 News and Radio 4's Today, calling the tests a major step forward, yet Public Health England found the tests unreliable. It's also good to note that Roche, they now own the patents of the Kary-Mullis PCR test, which is what they were selling to the government. And if we look into some of the SAGE members, such as Sir Patrick Vallance and Professor Chris Whitty, they were receiving money from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. We also have people such as Dame Angela McLean and Peter Horby. They were part of the University of Oxford and the AstraZeneca, getting all the contracts in for the government there. A lot of contracts were going to Serco as well as the major invest by GlaxoSmithKline in the early years. So there's a hell of a lot of conflicts of interest going on between many members of the government and the SAGE members, also in the Cobra, and also members of the government who have interests in a number of these companies before the pandemic started, during and now. Psychological teams such as the Behavioural Insights team nudge society into certain paths where they can control the opposition and how they like and get them to behave in certain ways on a mass scale. So the government censorship network consists of the Joint Biosecurity Centre, MI6, which is international intelligence, the MI5, which is within the UK, the GCHQ, which gathers intelligence and data on a mass scale and gives it to the government, Crown and Army on a daily basis, and this is all led by National Security Council, set up by the Cabinet Office, which has its own rapid response unit, communications team, the 13th Signals, who share intelligence with Whitehall, the media and the behavioural teams. The 77th Brigade, as mentioned before, engage in online warfare and purposely are giving out misinformation and lies to the people as so they can control the honeypots and the sort of controlled opposition. You then have the Five Eyes Echelon system, which gathers international data and intelligence technology. This is sort of online and through communications, phones, computers. Then we have the new DCMS fake news unit, the Hot 18 team, set up on the 24th of November, who will excel the sort of corruption, lies, science denialism and hate onto the people in a more public fashion. They're basically just being open with it all now and telling us what they're doing, and there's a lot of censorship going on, and we can see it within the groups, but only a small number of the population can actually see that this is going on, and we're trying to get more of this information out across many different channels and people, YouTube channels. So we need to sort of research these people more and spread the information around a little bit more of what this crony, corrupt government is doing to the people of the UK at the moment.